Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Gerst. I've been hiring, firing, and mentoring executives, frontline employees, interns, and job seekers in companies around the world through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. I work with people in Hong Kong, India, Australia, and across the United States. What sets them apart? A lot, but there's more they have in common. And one of those commonalities is transition is a part of life. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions that are big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet, the people who can make the difference that matters to you right now. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big change. The insight track you're going to access during our future episodes is better than a crystal ball. It's the exact information you need to take that next step. Whether you're a new grad applying for your first professional job, someone looking to transition your work experience into a promotion, launching your own company, or maybe even starting to plan your retirement, you're in transition, and this series is for you. We all know transition can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have VIP access to the future you want. Are you tired of the uncertainty of being passed up? We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to the front of the line. So, if change is on your horizon, or maybe just the thought of change, you won't want to miss this discussion. It could be the exact edge you need to turn transition into an amazing opportunity. Today on People in Transition, we have Victoria Pelletier with us. Victoria is a speaker, an author, a networking champion, and decades worth of experience in the business world. Victoria, thank you so much for joining us today.
Bob, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Victoria, when you were younger, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a lawyer. I think I spent far too much time with my mother, and I'm going to date myself, watching LA Law. And so I was determined that I was going to be a corporate lawyer after seeing the actors on television.
And what were the transition moments that occurred to you to get you from that picture of yourself as that LA lawyer to where you're at today?
I'd say, Bob, that I very clearly had a goal, a mission, a purpose for myself in terms of where I wanted to be. But I learned quickly throughout my university years that I really enjoyed the corporate world, leading teams and people and clients. My lesson was to follow my passion. And so what I thought was going to be a year off before I went to law school, while I worked at the time in a bank leading people, became my career. In the professional services world, doing the things that motivate me, drive me, and, keep me challenged every day. And that ended up not being law.
Victoria, what are the 3 questions that you're asked most frequently by job seekers that you interact with?
I would say that I'm usually asked about my own career. How did I get here? What do I attribute my success to? So that would be question number 1. 2 is around how to navigate and meet the right people to help secure a job. And 3 is, what do I seek to hear from candidates about what would make them the right individual for the role that I'm hiring for?
And what did get you to where you're at today?
I attribute it to a few different things. So first and foremost has been solid performance. That was the one thing I could consistently control, was how I showed up every day and delivered against the success metrics, the deliverables that were put in front of me. And that also meant maintaining the currency of my skills and also where the market was going and my company was going to make sure I still stayed relevant. So performance was 1. 2 was an incredibly strong brand that was more than the subject matter expertise for which I was known. It was about who I am holistically as an individual, as a leader. So my personal brand, and by extension, my network. And then subsequently, it's been around having extreme amount of resilience. And I know your audience today would appreciate this, having been through multiple mergers, acquisitions, transitions, showing up every day in a very resilient manner, being what I call as unstoppable. It's one of my philosophies or life mantras in terms of overcoming obstacles that are put in front of me.
And Victoria, can you grow in your resilience? And if so, how do you do that?
Yeah, I think you really can. In fact, I often believe that people need to understand their other people's individual context, their why, their lived experience, because it informs how they show up, they act, they respond, the emotions they feel every day. So my life story started with very, very challenging beginnings. And I'd say I had an unhealthy resilience, which was quite honestly to put walls up around myself, to have a mask that I showed at work every day. I was fearful of, showing my vulnerabilities to others and emotions for fear that people would view that would make me weak. And I've learned how to have a much healthier developing resilience. So the first would be around setting brave and ambitious goals for myself. It always kept me focused. So when there are setbacks, I can always go back to that as an anchor point. The next would be around being hyper aware. So getting really comfortable with self-analysis, looking hard and critically at myself and reflecting again on the things that drive actions, emotion, or behavior. And then once I do that, I then try and model that kind of thought or behavior that I want to seek. It doesn't mean I don't still break down in tears at some point, but I start to lean into the things that make me a little bit uncomfortable until they become more natural or innate. And then the last thing would be around giving myself permission to fail. I've achieved a significant amount of success in my career, but I've had a tremendous amount of failure along the way. And now very much give myself permission to fail fast, and again, pick myself up and bring myself back to those ambitious goals I set for myself.
Victoria, you talked about brand and personal brand. Why is that brand important and how can you make it better?
So brand has become even more critical. If you think in this pandemic, hopefully I'll say post-pandemic era, where we no longer had the opportunity to look physically in the whites of one another's eyes versus a window screen, a video conference screen. So I'll tell you, I have long since never met with a client or a potential candidate without looking them up online, particularly LinkedIn from a business perspective. And I want to learn more about the whole person, not just the most recent job title that they've held and maybe the brief description of that, but more so how do they show up holistically? What is important? What makes them unique? What's their unique value proposition? How are they in terms of interpersonal skills? What are the things that matter most to them? More and more, both consumers in terms of buying things, but employees are looking to work for companies that have shared value system with themselves. And so a personal brand is all of that, right? It's the functional expertise or subject matter expertise for which you're known, but it's all the things that make you different or unique and aligned to the people that you're going to be working with or for.
Victoria, why do you think you should be targeted in your job search versus just kind of flooding the market with your resume or information?
Well, because one, there's so many jobs out there at this moment. And so then as a employer looking to hire, I'm looking for people who are expressing great interest in the roles that I'm offering. I know that there are tons of other opportunities for them. So one who's very much interested in the company that I work for, the role that I'm offering, the clients or team that they get to engage with. So I think that's very important. But also, I think being strategically intentional around the people, as I said, the people you want to work with, the type of work you want to do, and the right companies that align to your personal values. I'm looking for that in a candidate. So I think it's really important for candidates to do the same in seeking out what's going to keep them, not only has attracted them to the company, but ultimately is going to keep them there.
Can you define for me what networking means to you? How do you do it? And who do you network with first to get you started down that path?
Yes, I'm a big believer that, quite honestly, only one network. Many people distinguish between their personal network and a professional network, and maybe there's other networks related to some of their hobbies or activities. But the reality is this is all just life. And we know that the world's smaller and smaller in terms of the whole Kevin Bacon 6 degrees of separation, and you never know who is connected to whom. And so for me, I strongly believe in both organic networking. So putting yourself and being open, and it doesn't mean you have to be an extrovert, but putting yourself in a place of comfort or leaning in to build the network both organically. So for me, that's things like I'm extremely comfortable, talking to strangers. I'll talk to someone in an elevator or in line at the coffee shop. I think there's the organic networking that occurs and being open to these that may come. Just because you might be in a personal context or setting doesn't mean it can't translate into something professionally for you. The next element from a networking standpoint is that strategic intentionality. So to your last question, it's mapping out what is the career objective you have for yourself. Either it's an industry or a company you want to work for, or you might be breaking into a new role or functional area that you don't have experience in. So connecting yourself to people who have similar career paths or are highly influential. Maybe they're not the hiring manager, but they're connected to, or they have great insight. So I think that those two elements of networking are critically important around building a network organically and recognizing that a personal contact or initially thought of as personal contact can translate to you professionally, but then also being really intentional around who you target and reach out to build that network.
Victoria, I read somewhere is that a good idea in your beginning stages of your networking is to reach out to former colleagues. But let's say that it's been a while since I've really talked with them. How do I start that discussion and how do I help frame what I need from them going forward?
I'd say, Bob, I think there's two things that I would say about that. The first is I believe strongly that you need to build your network and maintain the network so that it's there when you do need it. So that means I would encourage people to stay at least loosely in touch with their broad network, whether LinkedIn or other sites make that really easy when it's a new job, it's a promotion they've received. So it's really quick and easy to like that, to submit a one-liner to congratulate them or wish them well. So build the network for when you don't need it, so it's there for you when you do. One. Two is around reaching out to those colleagues that maybe you haven't stayed in touch with. My advice, and it's probably just because it's a personal preference for me and it happens quite frequently, I'd rather someone be completely honest and transparent with me when they reach out to me. So say, hi, Victoria, I know we haven't spoken and just, I recently had this, someone I hadn't worked with in 17 years, I believe. I was pretty sure he was contacting me for a job. Just acknowledge that. I'm sorry, I've been horrible at staying in contact with you. Life's taken me down this path and doing these things, and I apologize for that. I'm now in this situation where I need some help. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind taking a moment for me to have a brief conversation with you. Something like that versus pretending that it's anything other than a reach out for help. I'd much rather someone be open and transparent with me and actually puts me in a position to want to, be much more generous with my time.
Victoria, you talked about kind of the one-liner on LinkedIn. Is networking on social media different somehow? And are there things besides that one-liner that you should do to be successful on that platform?
Well, I think there's a multitude of things to do on that platform. So going back to personal brand, it is a great place to build your brand. So it's not only having an amazing profile that outlines your skills, your expertise, again, the things that make you different, but continuing to be really relevant and consistent in posting with, it doesn't have to be your own articles. Not everyone's necessarily a great writer, but share other people's content that connects back directly with who you are and the things that mean most to you. And then, as I said, it's the one-liner and staying, consistently in contact or engaged with people. So for me, I couldn't tell you how much time I spend on LinkedIn or other social platforms, just because for me, if I think of someone, I'm in a certain situation or scenario and someone from my past comes to mind, I'm just going to quickly hop on there and say, hey, you just came to mind. I thought of you. How are you doing? Or when I see that promotion, say, congrats, I wish you well. I know you're going to rock it. Those are things that are really easy to do and take very minimal time. And reality is LinkedIn's made it easier and easier with the fact that they even produce one-liners you can choose from to just simply click.
Someone once told me, Victoria, that when you're done with one of these networking meetings, that you should ask for names of other people to network with. How does that feel to you, and how does that
conversation look?
I think you need to gauge its appropriateness based upon the conversation that you've just held with that individual. I'm quite comfortable with it. Again, depending on where that conversation's gone, if they're looking to network with others within my organization or people who again have followed a career trajectory that they might be looking to go on, to ask me for advice. Do you know of anyone that, has gone down this path? Anyone you think I should recommend? I'm a big believer in this phrase, you don't ask, you don't get. Now it's come to bite me in the butt with my children who ask consistently for things, but that's how I approach life generally. You need to ask, whether it's for the coffee time to meet with someone, or in that case to ask if you think it's appropriate, but don't do it just for the sake of doing it either. Be really intentional, and maybe you've done some research and recognize that they're connected to a couple of other people and acknowledge that you've done your homework and said, hey, I saw that Sally or Sue is connected to your business. It seems like they've got a background similar to mine. Do you think that would be appropriate for me to connect with them? Or is there anyone else that you think I should be talking to?
Let's switch gears here for a moment, Victoria. You have read through hundreds, if not thousands, of resumes. What is the mechanics or the structure of an effective resume that catches your eye as a hiring manager?
I want a really solid summary at the top of a resume that tells me who they are. Again, that kind of brand statement. I don't want to know the title that you held. Who are you as an individual? What are you known for? What can you deliver? What kind of successes have you had? And what are you seeking for or seeking in your next role or company or environment? And then I want to see a career history. But again, I don't just want to know the title, because titles mean nothing in some cases or something very different in different industries or organizations. I want you to tell me what your title is. I want you to outline what you were responsible or accountable for. What did that role mean? And ideally, what were some of the successes you had or outcomes you were able to deliver in those roles that you held?
And on the flip side of that, any turnoffs that you've seen on resumes that you would just say, don't do this?
Well, I would say, and I'm a huge advocate and do a ton of work related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm not a big fan, and I would encourage people not to put their pictures on their resumes, would be one. And two is just having it be so generic and catch-all that's not, again, customized to the type of role or organization for the role that they're interviewing for. So I'd say, again, you might have, again, if you're looking at different types of roles or in different types of industries, to have different resumes that are a little bit more customized, and just don't make it too generic. So I understand who you are and the successes you've had in those roles.
Victoria, let's say that I've been out of work for an extended period of time. Maybe it's family reasons. It could be caused by all types of things. And I now want to re-enter the workforce. Two things. First, how do I show that on my resume? And then second, how do I talk through that in an interview that I might have, the gaps in my time?
So the first I would say, Bob, is personal preference for me is don't list it as a gap, right? So just talk reverse chronological order around the roles that you have held. If I'm looking really closely at your resume, I'm going to recognize that there might be a 1, 2, 3, however many year gap on there. So I'd say don't highlight it in the resume itself. That said, when you are speaking to the recruiter or the hiring manager, don't be shy or afraid to speak to it. Don't be embarrassed by it. Again, I'd rather someone be completely transparent. That says a lot to me about an individual, to own it, to say, look, I needed to take time off to support an aging family member, an ill family member. I took time off to support my children when they were young. Like, deep respect from that I would have for someone who would just say, this was my life choice and it worked well for me, and now I'm ready to be back in the workforce.
Victoria, is job hopping a bad thing in today's marketplace?
Not anymore. I think it's almost expected. I work for a large organization, and as I meet many people who are lifers, that truly is almost an anomaly now. I think it's quite common to see people 2, 3, 4 years at an organization, particularly the younger generations, to move on because they want faster career advancement, more opportunity, or they, quite frankly, are just deciding that they want to change functional roles or industries. So I don't think anyone should be too scared about that now. And I think it would be more of a rarity for that to be a red flag for hiring managers.
Victoria, I heard once that an interview was not so unlike a sales pitch where you're selling both your technical skills and your personal fit. How do you react to that?
I would hope that every interview, there is an assessment of both, right? Like you want to understand that technically a person can deliver towards the requisite skills or requirements to be successful in that role. But that said, we do business with people that we like and we trust, and therefore we want to be in business with. So I think someone should approach every interview recognizing that they need to show up. Again, their unique, going back to personal brand. What is their unique value proposition or differentiator for someone else who might show up with those same 8 or 9 out of 10 of the requisite skills that are listed on the role profile. So I think one should be really comfortable in demonstrating that. And again, why they're going to be a good fit, whether it's from a values perspective, industry experience, shared personal, passion or vision, again, doing your homework around the hiring manager before you get there. So I think we should not shy away from that. Obviously, we shouldn't ever be crossing into the 2.0 realm, and particularly be red flag if someone's asking those types of questions in the interview. But I definitely think you want to bring a good blend of both of those to an interview.
What's your favorite question or two that you've heard from candidates that you think really will help them get to know and understand the company and its culture?
I like when people ask me what success looks like. That doesn't get to the heart of company culture, but around what it's going to take to be successful in that role. And hopefully they're asking additional questions as I respond that tie directly into the culture and the leadership and how the organization works. And then if it hasn't come out naturally, then I want someone to ask about that. We know more than ever in this era of this great resignation, the great rethink, whatever you want to call it, that people are making decisions to leave companies, leave leaders, leave roles because there isn't a fit. So I think it's critically important. And I seek that for someone to be asking me those questions when they come into the interview.
Let's say that you are in your beginning stages of the interview process, and many of them today are done via Zoom. How can I increase my executive presence on this camera thing?
I think there's a few ways. And so I am not a believer in this phrase, fake it till you make it, in any regard, except when it comes to showing up with confidence. That's one. You may be incredibly nervous inside, but I think this is where I say pull on the fake it till you make it to appear to be confident. And what that means is around the tenor and the voice and how one speaks, not too many ums and ahs. And to the extent that you can, looking directly at the camera, which again is tough in Zoom because people tend to look down, but try to look directly again into the whites of the individual's eyes on the other side of the camera. And there's some great, tools. So I personally have a separate camera that allows me to do that much more easily. But rather than looking down, looking up and engaging with the candidate much more so. And again, it can be really informal, like in that you're staring into someone's bedroom potentially while having that conversation. But again, to try and bring a much more personal element and engagement, that in itself, I think, demonstrates some confidence to be able to have those kinds of conversations. And that comes with whether you're earlier in your career or a seasoned executive.
Victoria, any tips or techniques that you would share to a candidate so that they can learn to be a better interviewee overall?
I think there's a number of things I would suggest. So first of all is do your research. I know I've said that a couple of times, but make sure you understand the organization. Again, whether that's at a macro level, it depends on, the level and role you're coming into, but I do think you should still understand the organization. What does it state as its strategic or corporate priorities? What are some of the things, the values that they espouse, the strategic priorities for the organization as a whole, or even within the department specifically that you're looking to work within, around the leader. So doing some research around them, not to be all creepy like by knowing far too much information by the time you get on the interview with them, but to again demonstrate your interest, and the fact that you plan to show up well in delivering for the organization would be a couple of the things that I would suggest. And also being really clear around again, going back to how I like to see a resume, around the roles that you've held, be able to describe succinctly what you were responsible for and some of the successes and outcomes that you personally drove. And if you're looking to make a change, whether that's to a new industry or a tangential role, but not a direct hop from one organization, one role to another, then you need to build the bridge in terms of your experience for the interviewer. Don't expect that they're going to be able to do that on your behalf. So be prepared for that.
Victoria, you've talked a couple of times about researching company that you're talking with and understanding them better. If you were coaching someone in terms of how to go about doing that, where should they look? What should they do? Just Google the name of the company, or what should they do?
Well, the organizational information is often quite easy to find. And so depending on whether it's public or private, certainly you want to spend time on the company website, going on the news or media section and seeing some of the latest and greatest. If it's a publicly traded company, you can see quarterly reports, and within it, they'll be talking to the analysts about some of their top priorities, where they're making investments, et cetera, or in the annuals, whether it's quarterly or annual reports. Those are great ways to research the company. As it relates to the leaders or hiring managers, again, LinkedIn is my first go-to for sure. There's a lot you can learn there. Now, there's some people who are still not super active. And then, of course, you can go out to Google and see what you might find out there. I talk about the line between research and creepy. And so, you can Google and they might have their Facebook or Instagram accounts open publicly. That would be advice as well to your listeners here, to keep those private and to your friends. But you're going to learn more about an individual that way. See if there's articles they've posted or certain content they share. I think there's a lot out there on the web that you can at least get enough information to go in and have a sense of the individual, and not just the hiring manager. I think there's a great opportunity to look at others that are in their department, either that work for them or the leaders that they work for, to get a really good sense of the culture, the leadership, and what others are talking about within the organization. And I'm not talking hours here. This can all be done, within an hour, let's say, depending on, again, the seniority of the role or familiarity with the company and the leadership.
Victoria, how do you feel about a candidate asking at the end of the interview, how did I fit the needs you have for this position? How does that strike you?
I'm extremely comfortable when someone asks me that question. I personally like it, but not all interviewers are comfortable with that. I operate with radical candor in giving very open and honest and direct feedback from a place of care and to help the individual. But that's uncomfortable for some to do. And so therefore, the interviewer themselves might stumble in responding, particularly if there was some constructive feedback or lack of fit or experience, and they might be uncomfortable sharing that. So I would say gauge the interviewer and their confidence level and the flow of that whole conversation, and whether you think it's appropriate, how much you lean into that question, how deeply you go in there, or just a little bit more surface around their feedback on you and fit for the role.
As job-seeking candidates try to prepare themselves for the future, Victoria, what are some of the major trends or changes that you see for the future of our workforce?
A few things. So the pace of what I'll call digital transformation, but I don't mean purely technological, although technology is the enabler in all of this, is becoming at much more rapidly paced. This kind of compressed transformation timelines now, which means that the way work is getting done is shifting incredibly rapidly. And that means for candidates and employees, they need to be constantly upskilling, maintaining their currency of skills for the role in the department they're in and where their organization and the roles are going. So in much more administrative type roles, that can be automated, for example. How does one create their differentiation in terms of being critical thinkers, innovators, problem solvers, things that can't be solved through automation and AI? And so I think that's really, really important. So when I talk around one of my elements of success has been performance. Performance has meant consistently being a constant learner and adapting to those change. And also, therefore, a mindset that is much more around fluidity and change, and the fact that everyone talks about the future of work. Well, that's now. And so there's going to be new hybrid, different ways of operating. I'm sure your listeners are wide range generationally, and some are going to be much more comfortable with some of the technology and whatnot than others. And so for those who aren't, just leaning a little bit more into that, being comfortable saying, hey, I don't know what I don't know. Can you help me with that? And being open to the change and advancement that's coming very, very rapidly.
Victoria, any books or other resources that you'd recommend to someone going through their own personal transition?
There's two that I really like. So going back to the networking component, there's a book, I don't know, it's probably 10 plus years old now. It's called Never Eat Alone. Keith Ferrazzi, is the author. He's kind of a shameless, like, self-promoting consultant. Put that aside for a second as you read the book. It talks around some of those ways to be really strategic and intentional about networking. A lot of that's around sales, but it can be very applicable to searching for jobs. So that would be one. And the other is Simon Sinek's Infinite Game. So this philosophy that we don't win at life, we don't win at business. You know, we might win a new job, we might win a sales contract, but it's a much longer game. So going back also to my focus on resilience, recognizing we're going to fail fast, but we have these big, hairy, audacious goals for ourselves that we put out there that we'll pick ourselves up and move forward to. So I love that notion of this infinite game. Life and business and our career is not something we win at, and just recognize that it's a journey. So those would be the two I'd recommend.
Victoria, if our listeners only remember three things as they go through their own personal transition, what are those three things that you want them to take away?
I go back to that what I last stated around the book I'd recommend around this lifelong journey and path we're on from a career and life perspective. We're going to experience some setbacks at some point. Many things can be outside of our control. I personally have been through 18 mergers, acquisitions, and related transactions that have caused significant change in my own career. So recognize that those are going to happen, accept that there's going to be failure or defeat at times, and we're not, after 4 or 5 interviews, we might not be successful, but there's others out there. So that would be one around this incredible resilience that we can build and recognizing that it's a journey. The next is around creating your own path and owning it. I'd say there's this notion, I talked around my career success, I talked around performance, around personal brand, on network, on resilience. But the other one is around kind of what I say boundaries. And I don't mean the things that are so confining to oneself, but really the limitless ends of those bounds as well. So not letting anyone define for you what you should or shouldn't do, what's good for you, what's not good for you. I think only you can define that. So not that at times we don't just have to take a role and we need to make money, but, be really ambitious around the things that make you happy. I talk to, my kids often around when they ask me what they should do for their careers to follow their passion and do the things that they enjoy. So I'd give that advice to others. And the last is surround yourself with great people who are going to support you through this transition. So again, go back to the people you surround yourself, the networks you build, doing it from a place of generosity and not greed. I'm not a religious person, but I believe somehow in this spiritual karmic way of things coming back around. So even when you're suffering and through these times, opening your heart and being open to others, and it will come back to you at a later date as well. So I think those would probably be the three things I'd leave your audience with.
Victoria, I know that the audience takes away what a generous and open-hearted person that you are. I really thank you for your thoughts, for sharing your experiences, and for talking as openly and sharing as freely in terms of transition management. Thank you, Victoria, for your time.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. We're working in unprecedented times as the world responds to the recent COVID-19 crisis. The fact is that even those who are not in transition understand it could be right around the corner, next month or a year from now. The purpose of these episodes are to give listeners support and the critical tools to adjust with the winds, wherever they come. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully, perhaps gracefully or without too many battle scars, survived their own obstacle courses, and can share useful information on how to steady your ship or your world in this uncertainty. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on social media. If you have any questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I appreciate your time you're investing in sharing these important conversations with me, my guests, and others who are going through life transition. Transitions between jobs, life stages, new entrepreneurial ventures, or whatever life brings. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode of People in Transition.